Thank you and good evening. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. I go through that fairly formal introduction tonight. Many of you are often visitors here, but many of you are new here tonight, and we're thrilled to have you. So before we move into the main part of the program, I would like to recognize our visitors here who are part of the Public Policy and Leadership Conference at the Kennedy. I'm not going to make you stand up and introduce yourselves, but please raise your hands. Just raise your hands up for a second. Wonderful. These are young women and men from across the United States who are first and second year college students and who are thinking about possible careers in public service and who are here with us for a couple of days to get a sense of what this might mean and what it might mean to go to a graduate school of government at some point in their lives down the road, and how they might even figure out how to fund such a thing if they were to do it. This is it the 10th year? 8th year of this wonderful program that was started by our students. Students came to me 8 or 9 years, I guess it was 9 years ago, and said, we need to find a way to get college students to think about this option for their lives, and not just only business school or law school or medical school. And they came up with this idea, and we've tried to support them, and it's been a wonderful program. Now we're beginning to see graduates of the PPLC come through the Kennedy School, through the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, through the Ford School at Michigan, and other such good places, and go on to careers in public policy. So we're thrilled to have you with us, and we welcome you very much. And I would like to just very briefly recognize and thank this year's organizers. And I'd ask them to just stand up for a second. Alexis Watson, where's Alexis? Are you here? Oh, she's up there. Salam Daniel, I know I saw, so she's up there as well. And Lin Yang. These are Kennedy School students. And they have organized all of this year with the help and support of our admissions office and the pillar of the admissions office, Jason Smith. Where's Jason? Jason, are you? Well, there he is, yes, hiding up in the back. Thank you very much. And so it is a great honor for me to be sharing this stage with Robert Moses, whom I've admired from a distance for a long time, and as a person who, among other things in his life, actually tried to teach algebra at one point. I admire people who do it successfully for long periods of time. But to introduce him, we have invited back to the Kennedy School. One of the great thrills of working here is to see what our students go off and do in life after they graduate. And we've invited back tonight Jewel James, who is a Master's in Public Policy graduate from just last June. And last year at this time, she was one of the organizers of the PPLC program, and we're thrilled to have her back with us tonight. Since leaving the Kennedy School, Jewel has become Vice President and Director of Public Affairs at Citizens Bank. And she's responsible for government affairs, public and community relations, corporate sponsorships, and philanthropic giving in Massachusetts. She gives away money. So this is we like this. This is a good thing. In addition, Jewel is committed to volunteerism and community service. She is a member of the board of directors of Massachusetts' largest anti-hunger organization, Project Bread. She's also a member of the Boston Chamber of Commerce's Women's Advisory Board. Governor Patrick has recently appointed her to serve on the Innovative Schools Subcommittee of the Commonwealth Readiness Project, which is one of his major initiatives. In addition to graduating from the Kennedy School, Jewel is a proud graduate of Howard University. And prior to coming to the Kennedy School, she was a special projects director for the Congressional Black Caucus, of course, in Washington, D.C. We're thrilled to have her back, and we're very proud of her. And I will cede the microphone to Jewel to introduce our speaker tonight. Ma'am.
Thank you, Dean McCarthy, for that very kind introduction. Dean McCarthy was actually my advisor when I was here at the Kennedy School, and I am tremendously grateful to him because I spent many hours in his office wringing my hands about what was I going to do when I graduated, and I am testament to all of those who are preparing to graduate from the Kennedy School this year that you will indeed find a job and you will be able to pay back your student loans. So, thank you, and I've actually been spending a lot of time with his wife, Marina. We've been campaigning together, so I feel a part of the McCarthy extended family, and I just thank you for your graciousness and the wonderful help that you've given me. It really is such an honor to be back at the Kennedy School today, especially on this occasion to introduce the keynote speaker for the Public Policy and Leadership Conference. As Dean McCarthy mentioned, I was the coordinator for this conference last year and the year before that, and it really was one of the great joys of my time here at the Kennedy School to be a part of an institution that would take the time to bring college students from underrepresented areas to such a wonderful university like Harvard to show what graduate school and public policy is all about. And so we are happy to have you here. Welcome. And I know I speak on behalf of all the Kennedy School when I say that, welcome. And I also like to congratulate this year's coordinators for a job well done, because I can assure you that you will have a wonderful time here, and I encourage you to take advantage of all the resources that will be at your disposal over the weekend. And it really is my pleasure now to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Robert Moses. One of my favorite quotes is from T.E. Lawrence, who said that all men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by the dusty recesses, those who dream at night in the dusty recesses of their mind, wake to find that it is vanity. But dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dreams with eyes wide open to make it possible. Tonight's speaker was surely considered a dangerous man by some in the 1960s because he dared dream that African Americans should have full political rights. In 1961, Robert Moses became a member of the Freedom Riders. After training in nonviolent techniques, black and white volunteers sat next to each other as they traveled through the Deep South. Local police were unwilling to protect these passengers, and in several places, they were beaten up by white mobs, and Moses endured numerous beatings and jailings. Moses emerged as one of the leading figures in SNCC, and in 1964 was the main organizer of the Freedom Summer Project. Its main objective was to try to end the political disenfranchisement of African Americans in the Deep South. He also organized the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which challenged the Mississippi Regulars at the 1964 Democratic Party Convention in Atlantic City. After Stokely Carmichael was elected chairman of SNCC in 1966, the organization became a supporter of Black Power. Disillusioned by this change, Moses left, and after working as a teacher for the Ministry of Education in Tanzania. In 1976, Moses returned to Harvard to complete his doctorate in philosophy. In 1982, Moses was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, and over the next 5 years, he developed the Algebra Project. Moses currently teaches algebra and geometry to high school students at Lanier High School in Jackson, Mississippi. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Robert Moses.
Testing, it's on. So thanks, Jewel and Dean McCarthy. And how's everybody? Good. It was a relief to hear him say it. I was driving in Miami on my way to Florida International University Thursday, January 30th, between 2 and 3. The sun was shining, and I was listening to Talk of the Nation. A caller from Florida identified himself as a longtime Democrat and said he could not, and if given the chance, would not, vote for an African American for president. It might not have been a relief if the caller had been angry. He wasn't. Or had insulted people. He didn't. Calmly, he let listeners in on who he was, a man, a Democrat, who was simply not ready to vote for an African American for president. Voicing a theme that Scott Malcolmson says has sounded from colonial times to the present. The idea that he was normal, free, and beyond race, and therefore fully human. I thought his comment radical in Ella Baker's sense of radical, getting down to and understanding a root cause. It was a surprise to have her write it. I was reading in the op-ed page of the New York Times about a young reporter, Russell Berman, and his talk of the campaign trail about two women at the Democratic primaries in Maryland. One, 77, and an Obama supporter, confided that she just isn't sure she's ready for a woman president. Another, 83, and a Hillary supporter, confided that she just isn't sure she's ready for a black president. Two remarks around which Maureen Dowd organized her comments. We're not just in the most whirlwind, she wrote vertiginous, election of our lives, we're in another national seminar on gender and race that is teaching us about who we are as we figure out what we want America to be. In his speech to accept the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate in Illinois in 1858, Lincoln dealt with this question as it arose in his time. If we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could better judge what to do and how to do it. The preamble to the Constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, do ordain and establish this Constitution." Radical. And radical also in Ella Baker's sense of radical, facing a system that does not lend itself to your needs and devising means by which you change that system. Radical but flawed. Flawed in its notion of who the constitutional people were, the people who had constitutional rights and obligations, the people who were to use the Constitution to govern themselves, and everyone else living under the constitutional tent. Flawed in the reach of its we. Scott Malcolmson perceives a similar flaw surfacing 177 years later in SNCC, as it wrestled with what to do and how to do it on the eve of Freedom Summer. In appealing successfully to white America through the spectacle of white death, in appealing to the basis and most contemptible of white thoughts, that white people are simply more valuable than others, SNCC had strangled something in itself. It lost track of human unity. Scott argues that in 1787, the framers of the Constitution also lost track of their human unity by saying, in effect, not we. In colonial and revolutionary America, he writes, whites, unlike all others, did not gain their racial character from their race. Their character was a human character. Other people's characters were racial. The announcers on NPR responded to the caller from Florida by saying perhaps if he got to know Obama, he might be able to reconsider his position. A fully human announcer speaking to a fully human caller about the need to give the benefit of doubt to a stranger. When Kingman Brewster died, it fell to Sam Chauncey to say how Kingman should be remembered and to plan a memorable space on which to write it down. Sam designed a low black marble wall to enclose Kingman's grave in the Grove Street Cemetery where all presidents of Yale rest, and had etched on it two sentences. The presumption of innocence is not just a legal concept. In common sense terms, it depends on that generosity of spirit which sees the best, not the worst, in the stranger. A stranger, a 9-year-old West African boy thrown into a river of strangers bound for colonial America, deposited in Norfolk, Virginia, acquired his slave name, Somerset, along with his slave master, Stuart. It was 1749 when Charles Stuart adopted personable Somerset as his personal slave. 20 years passed, and Somerset traveled with Stuart to England to help with his sister's family when her husband died. It is 1769, Somerset is 29, and plots his escape. 2 years passed, and on October 1st, 1771, Somerset left Stuart, only to be captured again. But this time history happens. An English godparent petitions the King's Bench for a writ of habeas corpus, and Lord Mansfield, the Chief Justice, issues it. On December 9th, a Captain Knowles appeared in King's Bench with Somerset and explained. Stuart had delivered his slave, Somerset, so that he, Knowles, could take the slave to be sold in Jamaica. Stewart, feeling betrayed and publicly insulted, insisted on a trial. On June 22, 1772, the clerk of King's Bench called the case of James Somerset, a Negro, on habeas corpus, and Lord Mansfield delivered his judgment, bewigged. The state of slavery is of such a nature that it is incapable of being introduced on any reasons, moral or political. It's so odious that nothing can be suffered to support it but positive law. Whatever inconveniences therefore may follow from the decision, I cannot say this case is allowed or approved by the law of England, and therefore the black must be discharged. The issue flew across the Atlantic into Virginia and Revolutionary America, where colonists could not imagine their slaves as constitutional people, and wrote a bit of positive law into their Constitution. On June 30th, 1787, James Madison took the floor of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia to argue the states were divided into different interests, not by their difference of size, but principally from the effects of their having or not having slaves. The institution of slavery and its consequences form the line of discrimination. 2 weeks later, the Northwest Ordinance, passed by the Continental Congress in session in New York City, divided the nation into slave and free states, the line of discrimination being the Ohio River. There is a clause about Somersets and their Stewarts in our Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, Paragraph 3. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor is due. Constitutional men, bent on establishing a workable government, wrote a bit of positive law to establish the strangers in their midst as constitutional property, bracketing on the way their religious impulses to understand the rule of law, the presumption of innocence, as biblical common sense. There shall be one law unto you, and unto the stranger who dwelleth within thy gates, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Our constitutional nation, so conceived and so divided, suffered and thrived for the next 70 years, but maintained its national compact about slavery until Dred Scott ran away. On March 6, 1857, Chief Justice Roger Taney issued a national paper on constitutional people, the opinion he wrote in the case of Dred Scott v. Sanford. The Chief Justice informed the nation that Dred Scott, a piece of constitutional property, had no standing to sue in the nation's courts. The rule of law, the presumption of innocence, did not apply to constitutional property, as constitutional property had no rights, which constitutional people were obligated to respect. The constitutionally protected right was the right of a steward to regain his property, a Somerset. The decision by the Chief Justice broke the national compact over how to protect slavery, and in the metaphors of the historian Drew Gilpin Faust, this republic of suffering spiraled into its wars of death. The number of soldiers who died between 1861 and 1865, an estimated 620,000, is approximately equal to the total American fatalities in the Revolution, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War combined. In 1875, Democrats in Mississippi led a national workshop on race. With their tactics and their violence, Mississippi Democrats told the nation and President Grant, "This is where we are and whither we are tending. Here is what to do and how to do it." After the Republican state legislature had been overthrown, Mississippi Congressman John Roy Lynch had a conversation with President Grant. He asked why Grant had not sent in federal troops. Grant said he had responded as the head of the party rather than the head of the nation, Ohio had not ratified the 15th Amendment of 1870, establishing the right of citizens to vote, and a delegation of Ohio Republicans persuaded Grant that sending troops to protect the right to vote for Republicans in Mississippi would cost Republicans in Ohio the governorship. Hayes became governor of Ohio in 1875, and then in 1876 ran for president. In that election, it was Mississippi's what to do and how to do it that set the tone for South Carolina and Louisiana and set the stage for the Grand Compromise of 1877. Republicans got Hayes as president. Democrats got the withdrawal of federal troops from the South. The nation ended its wars of death. We hold. So said John Minor Wisdom, a judge in the Fifth Circuit, speaking in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for a three-judge panel. On November 27, 1963, 5 days after President Kennedy was gunned down in Dallas, and 105 years after Chief Justice Taney broke the National Compact on Slavery, Judge Wisdom held in his hands yet another national paper on constitutional people. The opinion he wrote for the case of the United States of America versus the state of Louisiana. Among the counsel, Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, Burke Marshall, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, and John Doe. We hold this wall, built to bar Negroes from the access to the franchise, must come down. Holding history more important than logic, Judge Wisdom held the Louisiana interpretation test and its current variant, the citizenship test, are rooted in the state's historic policy and dominant white citizens' firm determination to maintain white supremacy in state and local government by denying to Negroes the right to vote. Then comes a passage from Judge Wisdom that could have been written a century before by Chief Justice Taney. We hold. In such a conflict with the state, the power of the nation to protect itself and to go into its own courts to prevent the states from destroying federally protected rights of citizens derived from the Constitution would seem to be inherent in our federal system. For Chief Justice Taney, this passage had to mean the right of a Stuart to recapture a Somerset. Taney invoked original intent to state that the framers believed that blacks had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. He was bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic whenever profit could be made of it. But just because constitutional concepts are central to our lived lives, they cannot therefore be just legal concepts. Even the constitutional concept upholding the right of a Stuart to recapture a Somerset could not be just a legal concept. It too depended on a generosity of spirit, but one that saw the best, not the worst, in every other constitutional person. Benjamin Franklin, writing in 1751, expressed this as a generosity of spirit toward whiteness. Perhaps I am partial to the white complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. In his House Divided speech 1 year after Dred Scott, Lincoln famously announced the demise of the natural partiality of whiteness. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. It will become all one thing or all the other. For 70 years, from 1787 to 1857, Somerset to Dred Scott, the nation struggled with runaway constitutional properties. Then came its wars of death, after which it did not become all one thing or all the other. Mississippi's Constitution of 1890 launched its second plan of what to do, beat the Negro down, and how to do it, Jim Crow. caste replaced slavery, the noose replaced the whip. The nation struggled under this plan for another 70 years, from 1890 to 1960. On February 1st of that year, 4 Negro college boys, freshmen at the Agricultural and Technical College in Greensboro, North Carolina, asked politely for coffee at Woolworth's lunch counter and continued to sit in silent protest when refused. The sit-in, wrote C. Van Woodward, the nemesis of Jim Crow, was born. A minute later, just 4 years of intense, persistent, and earned insurgencies later, came a lead editorial in the New York Herald Tribune on August 24th, 1964. The choice for both the Democrat and Republican parties is ultimately as inevitable as the issue is inescapable. The dynamics of history won't be thwarted. The call of conscience won't be stilled. The tide of the future rolled into the Democratic Convention at Atlantic City with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which, whatever its shaky legal foundations, represents the nation's founding doctrine and certain destiny: all men are created equal. That tide of the future that rolled into Atlantic City in August of 1964 was the manifestation of sit-in energy, transported into Mississippi by SNCC, via Amzie Moore and his fellow leaders of local chapters of the NAACP, notably C.C. Bryant, Webb Owens, E.W. Steptoe, Aaron Henry, and Vernon Damer, and by its state field secretary, Medgar Evers. Today, traveling to this event, I picked up a copy of the current issue of U.S. News and World Report. It has a picture of Obama on the cover. In one article entitled "The Obama Effect," Jay Tolson writes, "The big question now is whether Obama's campaign can move enough Americans beyond the attachment to the dominant style of identity and special interest politics. Given who Obama is, it is no small irony that that style began to take shape in the civil rights era of the 50s and early 60s. Tolson quotes Boston College political scientist Peter Skerry, who tags it public interest politics. Public interest politics depended on publicity and the media to focus the public's attention on their favorite issues. First associated mainly with liberal and progressive causes, it has long been adopted by everyone from conservatives and libertarians opposed to taxes to fundamentalist evangelicals protecting family values. He said, "I welcome Obama's rhetoric, but I don't think he is the transformational leader everyone thinks he is." In the same issue, Kenneth Walsh, in 101 with Barack Obama, asks Obama, "Transformational presidents don't come along very often. Does that word apply to you?" To which Obama replies, "First of all, I don't presume to think of myself as a transformational figure. I'm just trying to win an election." So that's point number one. I do think it's a transformational moment, and so it is. And so we should break with the politics that is extremely rhetorical, exaggerates conflicts, and emphasizes grievances. We should explore the constitutional reach of we. Open our eyes and wake up to the fact that already Obama, 150 years later, is leading the nation into Lincoln's conversation about where and whither, what and how. Simple words with profound implications, inviting us to explore with each other, the caller and the announcer, the reporter and the participant, where we are and whither we are tending, what to do and how to do it. Inviting us to make constitutional progress, to become for the first time in our history a truly constitutional people, to make good on our claim, we the people do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moses, for that terrific constitutional history lesson. That from an algebra teacher. I'm quite impressed. I took some notes, and thank you. That was very interesting. As is our custom here at forum events, we will now entertain questions from the audience. And we have a custom for entertaining those questions. If you would approach one of the microphones, and you'll find microphones, 2 of them here on the floor and 2 in the middle loges going up the steps. And so if you would line up at the steps or at the microphones and direct your question, please begin by introducing yourself and saying what your affiliation is, if any, with the university. And please try to keep the questions as brief as possible so we have time for as many as possible. Sir.
Hi, thank you for coming and speaking to us today. I had a question about Teach for America, and I was wondering whether you think Teach for America, which takes students from universities like Harvard and puts them in inner city schools, does a good enough job because of the fact that it tries to inspire the younger generation, or is actually falling short because it doesn't spend enough time with the students in these schools and is just a 2 or 3 year transitional period for these students.
You forgot the introduction part.
Yeah, sorry about that. My name is Tarun Singh. I'm a sophomore at the college.
So here's what I think. We are a country who runs sharecropper education. And we started after the Civil War. And if you read James Bryant Conant's little book, Slums and Suburbs, and Conant, you remember, was president of Harvard from 1933 to 1953 and oversaw the idea of meritocracy as a basis for admission to universities. And after he retired, he went and took a look at public schools. And it's the only place where I've seen in writing the idea that what he says is that after the Civil War, the country agreed to establish a caste system. And he says what he didn't realize, what the clearest manifestation of the caste system was in our educational system. So if we are a country that has an education system which is driving a caste system, Teach for America isn't going to help. Now, it doesn't mean they're not doing good, but it's not even a Band-Aid. Well, we the people, right? So how many of you would like to work for a constitutional amendment that says that every child in this country has a constitutional right to a quality public school education? All right, so if we could start with that, right, then we would be on our way, right? Rodriguez, in 1971, the Rodriguez case, Texas, Mexican Americans sued. They wanted equal funding for their schools. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said there is no substantive, and the operative word was substantive. There's no substantive federal right to an education in this country, so you can't come to us. You don't have standing to sue in the federal courts to get equity around the funding for your public school system, right? So following Rodriguez, we now have 45 cases in 45 states all over this country about equity. But for purposes of our education, we are not citizens of the nation. We are citizens of states, right? And so this is a huge issue, right? And it isn't unrelated to what I was talking about how we started out with constitutional property. Right? It was William Alexander Percy who in 1875, in the Percys of the Delta of Mississippi, were a powerful family in Mississippi for generations, right? William Alexander Percy went into the Mississippi State Legislature to be the Speaker of the legislature for one term, to oversee the impeachment of Adelbert Ames, and to make sure that the article of the impeachment got in which said that the money that had been allocated by the Republicans for the education of the freed slaves should be used to build the railroads that he needed to set the stage for sharecropping in the Mississippi Delta. Now, what went with sharecropping was sharecropper education. The education that these are people who are only going to do a certain kind of work, and therefore they only need a certain kind of education. And if you think that that was in the past, look at the campaign for fiscal equity and the suit in New York City, New York State, around getting more money for New York City, because in that suit, the federal district judge said, yes, the state should give more money to the city. Pataki was governor at the time, and he said no, and he appealed it. A 4-judge panel said no, and the reason they said no was that the state constitution of New York requires 2 things: that we should educate our young people so they could serve on juries and vote, and an 8th grade education is appropriate to do that. That's all they need. And one judge said, furthermore, there are low-paying jobs, and who's going to fill them? So that's your 21st version of sharecropper education. And we're doing it in every major city all over the country. Look at New Orleans.
Thank you. Allison?
Thank you, Mr. Moses, for being here and for all the work that you've done. My name is Allison Oley. I'm a second-year master's in public policy student here at the Kennedy School. And before coming here, I taught public school for 8 years. And I was wondering, in your opinion, currently the way that the education arena is viewed is kind of denigrated as this less legitimate kind of work. It's noble, it's for people who love children, it's kind of sweet. What is it that you think needs to change in the public's view so that it can really be leveraged as the civil rights mechanism that it has the potential to be?
So what has to change is this idea of who the constitutional people are. What we care about are our children. So it's other people's children that we don't care about in terms of our educational system, right? And so we don't have a sense in this country, and we've never quite had it, that all the children in the country are children of the country, and all are our children. And we have an obligation for their welfare and for their, their opportunity structures. So, and I think that plays itself out in the teaching. So clearly, teaching would have to become a real profession, like lawyers and doctors, right? So I think that's part of what would have to happen. But the underlying attitude about other people's children and our sense of obligation as a nation, what is this? There's something that's going through Congress based on a report. I'm trying to get my mind around it, but it was a report that came out through the national systems, the National Institute of Engineering and Health and so forth, and it was a call to the country around what we need to do to keep competitive. And I think Bush put it in as the American Competitiveness Act. So the first bullet says that we should produce every year 10,000 more math and science teachers. And we should also give extra money if they go into the underserved communities, right? The question is, where do we have any consciousness of where we want to harvest our mathematical and scientific talent? When I went to the conference that they held, what I heard were two things. One, we should have state academies, so we cream the top from in every state. Two, we should harvest the planet's talent, so we should work with our immigration laws, right? So in the last half of the 20th century, we did that, right? We harvested the planet's talent. I don't think that's a program for the 21st century, but there isn't any consciousness of what we need to do to harvest our own talent, I think in part because there isn't the belief that it's really there.
Go to this loge up here and we'll sort of go around clockwise.
Thank you. Julian Baines, Prospect Hill Academy. Yeah, well, as we all know, you did a lot of work with SNCC, which we thank you for. And we were wondering, well, I was wondering, like SNCC did a lot of concrete work, like work in which you either had something you didn't, as in voting rights and certain rights that we didn't have at the time. Now, what do you propose organizations like SNCC do for aspects like equal housing? Because even today, we still find like segregation among housing in which a lot of black people reside in one neighborhood while a lot of white people in another. So my question basically is, how do you find a way to create an organization that could not only diversify neighborhoods and make neighborhoods better, but the education quality as everything in those neighborhoods better racially and economically?
So I think I should try to answer the spirit of your question, as opposed to trying to tackle the issue of housing, right? And talk about the work that I do, which I think of as comparable to the work that I did with SNCC. So in the 60s, we were using the right to vote as an organizing tool to get political access. And our main tool was a meeting place. That is, how do you take a meeting place where people come and help to make it a place where they figure out what to do and how to do it, right? So what we've done in the last 25 years is look at mathematics as an organizing tool. So how do you use mathematics in the same way we use the right to vote, but this time to get educational access and also economic access? So there's a whole world of difference between what happened in the industrial era in our country, where we were mechanizing physical work, and what's happening now in the information era in our country, where we're organizing mental thought. That is, the machinery of the industrial area helped us, pick cotton. It helped us to do physical work differently. But the machinery we have now, the computers, we use them to organize what we think about. And so what you have to do, what your young people, your friends have to do, is you have to get into the knowledge business, how you learn, how you train your mind, right? And you have to do that. You have to learn how to be someone who keeps learning all your life, right? And while you're doing that, then you have to figure out what you're going to do about where you live and what happens to your children when they go to school. But you yourself, you've got to get into your mind and decide that you are going to be a person who figures out how to learn and keeps doing that, right? So I do that. I teach school in the Algebra Project. I'm at Edison High School in Miami right now. And what we're doing is we're following a classroom of students. We picked them up in 2006, in the fall of 2006, and we've committed and asked them to commit to following with us through their 4 years of high school, that they should do math with us every day, 90 minutes a day, every year for 4 years. And they should set for themselves the goal that when they leave high school, they are not going to remediate math. They're going to land on their 2 feet in college. If they want to do something, follow some career, math is not going to be an obstacle to that career choice. And we're working with a school that has been an F school in Miami for the last 5 years. It just recently, got better to a D or something. And we're working with the bottom quartile of the kids in that school. And so our idea is that we need to send a message to this country that there's a way for the kids that are currently not making it in our school systems to actually be successful. But it requires a commitment on their part. So I'm hoping that's helpful.
Thank you very much. I'm Ethan Brackett. I'm a physician in Dorchester, and I'm also a mid-career MPA student here. And I actually was one of your students in 1988.
I'm just seeing you.
Yeah. And I think this actually may tag on a little bit to your answer to the last gentleman's question. But I'm very interested in the trajectory of your work. And from 20 years ago when I was working under you to your current work now, if there have been transformative moments or lessons that you have learned in your work from your students and with its context in this country as it's changing, as politically and economically, as well as in the world, particularly in the context of globalization and thinking about our citizens being citizens of the world and not just in this country.
Well, I mean, Ethan was in open school at Martin Luther King where we started the project, and that was in the 80s, right? It was 7th and 8th grade, or just 7th and 8th grade. So Ethan was part of the students that we were working with. Part of the trajectory, and I don't know if Omo is here, but part of the trajectory is that there are a group of young people who were contemporary. There's Omo. You're going to come to a mic, Omo? But there were a group of young people who were contemporary of Ethan's who have taken on the work and established themselves as what they call the Young People's Project, and are training young people to be math literacy workers. So I think in some sense that's the most important work that we've done. That is, we provided a space which young people that we were working with in the early 80s have now stepped into and are really growing the idea of, well, how do you have a culture in which young people embrace math and embrace it also as a part of a larger, I don't want to say political, but a larger cultural context. So that's one part of the work. The other part has been as we've gotten some purchase on the country, we've been able to think about what are the ways in which we might change the national conversation. So instead of the Cosby conversation, which is focused on, I mean, when I was in Mississippi, the reporters all asked the same question, well, Bob, isn't the problem your people are apathetic? And so Cosby has a version of that question about the kids. They're dysfunctional, or their families, or their communities. So I think it's the wrong conversation with the wrong people. We need to have a conversation with the country about how we got into this, and that's part of what I was trying to do earlier. But then, and then we have to have a conversation with the kids, but the conversation with the kids has to be with the kids. It can't be to the country about the kids. And so that's our problem. So, Omo, you want to take a shot at Ethan's question? This is
How you doing,
Omo.
Ethan? All right, we went, what were we in 8th grade together? That's 7th and 8th grade, right? So it's funny, my dad used to make us do the Saxon algebra book in the summer. And, you know, so that was my way to get ahead of what everyone had to do during the school year. But Ethan was the only kid that caught up to me and passed me, you know, in 8th grade. So I remember that. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to, I don't know if any of the young people from YPP can stand up and from BYOP. So I'm 35 now, and I'm, you know, a little bit old to be running the Young People's Project. So these are the folks that, you know, my dad has passed the torch and created a space for us to figure out how to organize and how to get young people to think about their work and what they need to do to, you know, change the trajectory of their own lives, but also to have an impact on their own communities. And so part of what we've tried to do is think about the work we need to do, to think about the culture and how we change the culture as it relates to how we value education, but also to look at the broader conditions that we have to struggle with and that we face as young people. And so these are the folks that are doing the work. They're doing it both locally and nationally. And, you know, if any of them want to talk about what they do in their work, then, you know, grab a mic.
This gentleman over here.
Good evening, Mr. Moses. My name is Bradley Toney, and I'm part of the Public Policy and Leadership Conference. I'm a visiting student here to the Kennedy School of Government. And one of the questions that I want to, or that I've been personally thinking about is, well, I'm a young person right now, and we're trying to get into the knowledge business, but it's the same old epistemes of thought about what it means to be a human that we always come back to. We always come back to these logics of race, gender, class, sexuality, whatnot, to define or to help us think through what it means to be a human. Well, how do we break out, or what is a strategy to begin to break out of these same old conversations? Because if we want to get into the knowledge business, we have to begin to think about the human in the context that not only recognize what's been established through these. I mean, disparities and inequalities exist, yes, in education, yes, in how punishment is distributed and equalized among racial bodies, whatever categories, and class disparities in housing and everything else. But we keep on, and there's this rhetoric of hope and logic that's given to us through politics and culture. But how do we break through this episteme of thought that we just keep coming back to? I mean, we're going in circles here as the older, the people who have come before us are giving us the right tools to begin to engage in these questions, but we always have conversations about the conversations and never actually like go out there and break this mess.
So I thought I heard a question in there. And actually, I thought I heard a question that I was trying to say something to provide some answers to earlier. And what I was trying to do in the talk and in the comment after the talk when I asked if people were interested in working on the idea of a constitutional amendment is to put out a concept of ourselves, trying to think of ourselves, if we can't get around what it is to be human and fully human, can we wrap our minds around the idea of what it would mean for us to think of ourselves as constitutional people in the sense of the preamble, that it's we the people who ordain and establish the Constitution, and that wasn't something that just happened once, right? It's something that has to happen all the time, right? And can we, in order to do that, we would have to have something that we all had at least a conversation about that we wanted to try to work on. So what I was suggesting, because education certainly is something that everyone who has children is thinking about how they're going to be educated, that we might try to have a national conversation about education around this issue of, well, should we have a constitutional amendment? What does it mean to have a quality public school education? Now, I've been in some workshops because you can go pretty far off on the issue. Well, people start saying what is quality and what's not, right? But we've been in some workshops where just two simple questions are asked of everybody in the workshop. What was your best experience as you went through school? What was your worst experience as you went through school? And when the people start listing these, you begin to get a picture of what might a quality public school education, what we might agree on a quality public school education might look like. At least some baseline, right? Some things that we might all agree on. So my experience is I don't practice conversations about conversations. So it's just not, it wasn't part of my experience in SNCC, right? And it's not part of my experience in the Algebra Project. So what makes coming up here and speaking to groups such as this real for me is the work that I'm doing in the classroom, right? Because I understand every day when I get in there what is going on and what the kids are grappling with and what's happening in this country. Now, I understood that in the 60s doing voter registration, right? And the idea of doing voter registration per se wasn't radical. It's not per se radical to go out and do voter registration in this country. Doing voter registration with sharecroppers in the Mississippi Delta was, right? Because if you got them to demand their rights, then the whole society had to change, right? And it's the same thing about doing math. Doing math isn't radical, teaching it in schools. It's teaching math in the bottom quartile of the kids in the system and helping them think through who they are, where they're going, what to do and how to do it. Those are the things that's radical. And so the answer to your question, that's how I find the answer for myself. I don't know if that helps.
That helps, but what I was getting at is when we have to rely on the collective to help ourselves get free, what's the danger? Or is there, as an individual, how can we get free on a personal basis, but we're still subject to the state, to the society? And no matter what inner strength we find, it's still suspect to the larger collective.
So how you get free as an individual on a personal basis. And what you're thinking about your freedom in spiritual terms?
I'm thinking pragmatically, because if I I can stand up here all day and say, you know, break these notions of race or whatever I have, but I'm still going to be perceived as a black male just because of the way my body looks by the larger society. And even if I feel comfortable with that title in and of myself and whatever other identities, no matter what religion or spirit or sexuality, whatever that I want to associate with myself that might not be as apparent, I'm still subject to interpretation, interrogation, and I can feel comfortable all day, but just pragmatically, I'm going to be subject to bias and to larger state norms. And what I'm just saying is, how do we begin to engage in a new dialogue
So my question is,
completely?
how do you perceive yourself? You say other people will perceive you a certain way. So how do you perceive yourself?
I mean, first and foremost, I perceive myself as a human. That's where I'm at right now. But I'm saying the state is so determined, our apparatuses are so overdetermined from within that we don't know how to begin a new dialogue or conversation. So how do we begin to engage that question then? Our definitions of the human are just so overdetermined from the start that we have to rely on those as individuals to get ourselves to a free place.
So I'm not sure I understand everything that you're asking about. I certainly have worked hard to try to figure out how I could be an American. And what has helped me have been people in America who have lived a life of struggling about America, and who primarily have lived their lives struggling to close the gap between what America preaches and what it practices. So I'm comfortable now with being an American in that sense, right? And so I don't know if that helps.
We may have to come back, because this is a philosophy seminar, so I want to get a couple of other people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time to get these last three questions in. Mr. Moses has a 7:30 appointment, and so I don't want to keep him too long. So let's go to you, and then we'll try to be as succinct as you can. Thank you very much.
Good evening, sir. My name is Chantel, and I'm a participant here with the PLC conference. And like everyone else that's here for the conference, I think we see problems in our society that need to be fixed, and I feel that we all are determined to see solutions brought to those problems. And just looking at the summary of your work and your lifetime, you must have had moments where you felt disillusioned. You felt daunted by the tasks you wanted to accomplish. What did you go to find strength to keep striving to reach those goals that you put before yourself? Because I know we will all find that in our lifetime, no matter what occupation we go into. What gave you the strength to keep going?
Well, when Herbert Lee was murdered in 1961, which was the beginning of our work in Mississippi, there were just a few of us who were working in southwest Mississippi. Herbert Lee was a farmer in Amite County. And he was murdered by Eugene Hurst, who was a member of the Mississippi State Legislature. And the case was never resolved. He had 7 small children. And we had to face that the work that we were doing might result in someone else getting murdered. So what personally helped me then was the people who lived there, who had lived there all their lives, who had brought us into the work. So there were two dimensions to the work. One was the sit-in movement, which were the young people, but then there were Amzie Moore and C.C. Bryant, E.W. Steptoe, the older NACP people who opened up their families and their lives to us. So it was the only time in my life where I could leave someplace any time at night, arrive someplace unannounced, and there was a place to sleep, somebody was going to feed me, and somebody was going to watch my back. And so we became a part of a very small network of families and people who were living in struggle in Mississippi in this work. And it was those relationships that sustained me at that period.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Moses. My name is Patrick Hidalgo, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School, and I'm actually from Miami, Florida as well, so it's great. It's great to have a Miami in here. And my question has to do with the current dialogue about how the Obama campaign and the movement that he's sort of generated can make inroads with the Latino community. I've been talking about this issue a lot with friends of mine here at the Kennedy School that are African American or Latino, and we've been thinking it through and debating different issues. And I just thought, given that you've done a lot of work in Miami, which has a sizable Latino and African American community, what insights or wisdom you might have as to how these two groups can continue to come together and form an alliance.
Actually, the Algebra Project has been trying to work with Ernie Cortez and the IAF, the Industrial Areas Foundation. Ernie organizes their work throughout the Southwest and California. And we were just meeting last week for a couple of days, but we're engaged in a project that we hope will get off the ground in LA, working with Ernie and his group. So there we're trying to use the base that they have, their community organizing, which they do, and of course they are heavily based in the Latino community there, but also they reach out to other communities, and to drop the math in that work. So that's what we're doing as part of that. We're trying to actually figure out how to forge an alliance at the grassroots level, at the community level, at the education level, around this issue of quality public school education. I don't know if that helps.
Unfortunately, this will have to be the last question.
Hi, Mr. Moses. My name is Eric Sanabria. I'm with the PPLC. I'm also a second year at Dartmouth College. My question centers around curriculum and pedagogy. I'm actually interested in becoming a teacher, a high school teacher back at home in South Central LA. And one of the things I'm interested in right now is the notion of critical pedagogy, which is founded on Paulo Freire's notion of anti-oppressive education, and which has become something that's hard to incorporate within math education. And so I was wondering, I was interested in hearing more about your experiences as a math educator, your triumphs and challenges in actually incorporating and creating a curriculum that serves to empower students and not accommodate them into the status quo.
So actually the main pedagogy that the Algebra Project has used is a marriage of two traditions, one of which is fairly well known, and that's tradition coming down from Piaget and experiential learning. Right? When I was here at Harvard in the 50s, I was in the philosophy department, and the star of the philosophy department was Willard Van Orman Quine. And Quine was a mathematical logician, but also thought a lot about philosophy of mathematics. And he said that elementary arithmetic, elementary set theory, and elementary logic got off the ground by what he called the regimentation of ordinary discourse. That is, you take the languages that people have, that they own, that they have ownership over, and you, so to speak, straitjacket them. And what you get is a conceptual language which nobody speaks, but which is the underpinning for all scientific discourse and mathematical discourse. So we've wedded those two ideas. So if you think about experiential learning, at 12 o'clock you have an event, and then at 1:15 you have reflection on the event. At 1/2 you have some abstract conceptualization based on your reflection, and then at 1:45 you have the application. So what we did was, between 1:15, the reflection, and 1/2, the conceptualization, we inserted ideas from Quine. The idea of people talk, the ordinary discourse, and then identifying features. What are the particular features that you want to mathematize? And then helping the students to develop what we call feature talk, which is Quine's regimented language, this conceptual language which isn't anyone's natural language. The point being that there's no privileged language to science, right? And so then we get them to do two kinds of representations. One, iconic, and they're used to iconic representations from their TV screens and, their computers, and then abstract representations. But what gets represented symbolically is the feature talk, right? So it's the shift from ordinary discourse to the feature talk. That's where all the hard work is. The heavy lifting is in moving, in sorting through what are the actual concepts that you want to focus on and how to distill them in a conceptual language, right? So it turns out that if you do that with the kids, and if you take the time to do that, then it's empowering, right? And it has nothing to do with any particular ethnicity or any particular cultural basis. And so it's available for every cultural basis, right? All you need to do is figure out what are the events that are important for any particular people that also can give rise to a particular mathematical concept that you want to dwell on. And so that's what we've done. We've been successful in attracting some research mathematicians who are helping us work on this problem. So it just isn't true that mathematics can't also be an empowering experience for kids. But it's true that as a country, as a nation, we have not, we just don't have a clue about actually developing our mathematical talent. It's sad.
Thank you. Please join me again in thanking Robert Moses for his generosity this evening and the generosity of his life's work. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful. The Q&A is just always